Storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. Joe Gaudette had seen them coming for a long time. He gradually reduced his activities, always keeping his eye on the cloud line. The housing market was too turbulent. People who were not eligible for housing loans were given them anyway. People who could barely afford monthly payments were offered adjustable rate loans with false ceilings. Once their rates rose to the true value, those people went from paying $300 or $400 a month to committing to pay between $1,000 and $1,500 a month, and they had no way to pay these exorbitant amounts. There were more buyers than sellers. People in and around Degard, Louisiana, were building houses at a breakneck pace, and houses were being torn apart before drywall could even be hung on them. Joe knew this frantic pace couldn't continue for long. The storm clouds of the late spring of 2008 were not limited to the housing market or the political arena. They were also in his own happy home. The chief financial officer of St. Elizabeth's Water and Sewer Authority pulled up to the modest home he shared with his wife, Gretchen, and her two daughters, Glenda and Gertrude Longlanise. The gray and white brick house was decorated with dark green trim. The eaves and gutters were painted forest green. The front door and faux wood shutters were also painted forest green. The garage door was painted bright white to tie in the gray and white brick and green. Only a woman would come up with something like that, Joe muttered as he parked on the left side of the driveway, leaving room for Gretchen to pull the minivan in and out of the garage. It was a two-car garage, but half of Joe's garage was occupied by his Harley-Davidson Fat Boy. There was a small path leading from the driveway to the front door, and between the path and the outer wall of the house was a gray and white brick flower box. When he and Gretchen bought the house, the perfect little house for you and me and the girls, there was only soggy soil in the flower box. Now flowers were planted there. Bushes and clumps of flowering plants enlivened the outside of the house. Inside, things were completely different. Inside, Gretchen was becoming increasingly unhappy for some reason, but she didn't say why. Glenda, at 13, and Gertrude, Ruddy, at 11, were constant sources of irritation to him. Both girls constantly reminded him that he was not their father. They shouldn't listen to him. However, both girls were very quick to come to him with an outstretched hand when they needed something. When they first got together, Gretchen asked Joe if he would consider adopting her then 10-year-old and 8-year-old girls. What? Gretchen, they already have a father, Joe reminded her. I'm not going to take the child away from his father. Vicky, his first wife, did exactly that to Joe. She met and eloped with a Colombian. They took Joseph Jr. to Colombia. 9 years and thousands of dollars later, Joe is no closer to seeing his son than he was the day Vicky emptied his bank account and flew out of the country with then 6-year-old Joseph Jr. David Longlanise may be a jerk, but he's still their father, Joe said. Standing in front of the house, Joe looked at the flowers again, then shook his head. He reached into his trouser pocket for the keys and opened the door. Joe? Hey, Joe? Someone called him. Joe turned to see a morbidly obese man quickly approaching him on his tree trunk legs. The man's face was drenched in sweat. His cheap suit seemed soaked with sweat. Bitch shit, it's hot, huh? The man croaked, approaching Joe. Yeah, and it's not June yet, Joe agreed. And to you, said Reynolds, handing Joe a manila envelope. What a surprise, Joe said dryly. Sorry, Joe, it's just a job, you know, Reynolds shrugged. No, you probably don't remember. 9 years ago, you did the same thing when my wife Vicky fled the country, Joe said. About. Sorry, Reynolds said, looking really uncomfortable. Joe didn't answer, just opened the door to his house and walked in. Bitch shit, he shouted when he saw the empty living room. The kitchen was also devoid of furniture. The office he used as a home office was also completely cleaned. An inspection of the cabinet door showed tool marks. Someone was desperately trying to break open the closet door. Joe took out his keys and opened the closet. He sighed with relief. The safe on the sturdy cabinet was also in place. He quickly turned the dial and breathed a sigh of relief again. After locking the closet, Joe continued to explore the rest of the house. Both bedrooms, Glenda's and Gertrude's, were empty. The master bedroom was empty of furniture, but his suits were still in the closet. His jeans, underwear, and socks, which were in the dresser, were thrown to the floor in a disordered heap. Then he returned to the closet once more. His gun safe was taken out. He mentally kicked himself. The contractors suggested bolting the massive safe to the concrete floor, but Joe didn't do it. It took 4 men with belts to lift the bulky cabinet into the closet. Certainly no thief could take it out. Bitch wife? Well, that's a different matter, isn't it? Joe muttered, looking at the dent left by the massive safe in the fluffy carpet. Joe returned to the kitchen and looked at the envelope Reynolds had given him. Kenneth Pergian, he muttered. Jesse Johnson's office, came the voice of Terry Browsard, Jesse Johnson's latest personal assistant. Jesse Johnson, please, this is Joe Gaudette, Joe said. And who is asking him? Terry asked. Joe Gaudette, Joe repeated. Jesse didn't hire personal assistants for their intelligence. He hired them based on their bra size. His favorite joke was that he was impressed not so much by their dictation as by their dictation. Jesse is on the phone, Jesse said. Jesse, this is Joe, Joe said. Gretchen filed for divorce, came home and saw an empty house. Joe described the condition of the house, then a terrible suspicion came over him. He ran into the garage and screamed in rage when he saw that there was a cover for his Harley on the floor, but the motorcycle itself was missing. You said Kenneth represents her? Jesse asked, almost laughing with joy. Joe called the police, reported the theft, and also told them who he suspected of stealing all his furniture, guns, and motorcycle. The guy right down the street. Found out that his old one is cheating on him. Burned the house down, one officer told his partner as he walked around the house. I remember this, said the partner. The guy just stood there, holding his cat in a carrier, and I watched the house burn. Don't give Gretchen any ideas, Joe said dryly. Since it was Friday and it was already after 5 in the evening, there wasn't much that could be done. With nothing to sleep on and without even his favorite pillow to rest his head on, Joe dumped his clothes into a plastic trash bag, placed a security bar on the front and back doors, then set the alarm. He then left the house through the garage door and reset the garage door code. Of course, she'll never figure it out. Joe grinned mirthlessly, entering today's date as a new code. Men walking into the DeGarde lobby with a trash bag was nothing new to the clerk. Men with angry expressions asking for a room were also quite common. Professional ethics prevented her from asking, so she turned on the sprinklers after she threw your clothes on the lawn. Professional ethics also prevented her from smirking when his debit card was declined. She simply calmly informed him that his card had been declined. Obviously, Joe spat and handed the woman his American Express card. Can I see your ID? She asked politely. Very good, Joe praised and showed her his driver's license. Jesse Johnson was in court Monday morning, a police report in one hand and a folder of Joe's receipts for stolen items in the other. Judge Stephen Hill agreed that Joe Gaudette was the rightful owner of the furniture and everything else, and everything should be returned to him in the same condition in which it was removed from the house. Kenneth Pergian did everything he could to delay the trial, but Jesse's client prevailed. Come on, Joe, let's go get your things, Jesse said. Joe rented a U-Haul truck, hired 3 of his employees from the plant, and drove to pick up 2 police officers who had filled out a police report the previous Friday night. I should have known, Joe said as he drove up to Keith Blanchard's house. Keith Blanchard started out as a painter, working for Scanduro Construction. He even briefly dated Anna Scanduro, the daughter of Dan Scanduro, owner of Scanduro Construction. When Tony Clark broke Dan Scanduro's iron grip on new construction in St. Elizabeth Parish, Robert Scanduro's iron grip on real estate sales, and Danny Scanduro's iron grip on rental housing, Keith went to work for Clark International. Within a few months, he became project manager, commanding teams of up to 20 people. Then he started working on his own. He worked quickly and cheaply, but his work, like Scanduro's, was often of dubious quality. Keith Blanchard approached First Union Bank, hoping to get a loan to build condominiums. Joseph Marcoloni, the bank's governor, was in favor of taking advantage of the recent housing boom. Two others on the council were also in favor of the deal. Three were against it. These three saw the same clouds as Joe. The three also knew about Keith Blanchard's shoddy work. Joe Goddett cast the casting vote and voted no on Keith Blanchard's condominium project. If looks could kill, the looks of Keith Blanchard, his brother Kevin Blanchard, and their lawyer Kenneth Prejean would have killed Joe Goddett several times over. Now, as Joe approached the man's house, he felt nauseous. His motorcycle was parked in front of the house and looked like it had been run over by Keith's three-quarter pickup. "Half of this shit is mine," Gretchen screamed, running out of the house. "But you did not have the right to remove anything from the joint home until the decree of division of property was made," Jesse Johnson replied. "But it's mine. I chose all of this," she screamed, trying to get to Joe. "Ma'am, calm down. I don't want to arrest you, ma'am," asked one of the policemen. "Ma'am, your children are here. They are looking at you," another policeman said firmly. "Do you really want them to see their mom acting like a wild woman?" "Hi, Mr. Joe. Do you like what we did to your bike?" Rudy Longlin-Eyes grinned. "H, I shouldn't have said anything," her younger sister Glenda reminded her. "You broke it, you bought it," Joe told a calmer Gretchen. The furniture removed from the joint home was damaged. The couch cushions were heavily stained with urine, and Joe's favorite leather chair and leather office chair were torn, and someone defecated on them. "I don't know what I did, but—" Joe muttered. "Oh, yes," Gretchen snapped angrily. "You know what you did. Keith told me everything." His table was empty. Gretchen claimed that she did not know where his papers, photographs of his son, photographs of his parents had gone. Someone took a sharp tool and violently tore out the bottom drawer, breaking the lock. Joe kept these few precious photographs in this drawer. Damn it! He actually burst into tears when he saw how his grandfather's table was damaged. The key was right here in the middle drawer. "Oops," Gretchen chuckled. "Ma'am, do you have anyone who can watch your children?" asked one of the policemen. "What? Why?" Gretchen asked. "Because we're going to arrest you, ma'am," he said. All this time, Joe noticed that Keith Blanchard was missing. Jesse noticed this too, called the office, and asked one of his colleagues to go to Judge Stephen Hill's office to file an arrest warrant for Keith Blanchard. Joe stoically took out his cell phone and pressed a number. "Hello, David." "Hi, it's Joe," Joe said. Amid Gretchen's screams, Joe told Glenda and Ruddy's father where his two girls were. So his U-Haul truck and 3 hired workers were used. Joe told them to remove the furniture he had bought for the 2 girls from Keith Blanchard's house and bring it to David's trailer. "I don't know what I did to make you 2 girls so mad at me," Joe said to the 2 still grinning girls. "But I love you." "You had that nigga, Mr. Keith told us," Glenda grinned. "And we don't love you," Ruddy snapped. "We hate you." "What? I never," Joe protested. Gretchen called Kenneth Prejean at the DeGard police station. Kenneth reminded Gretchen that he was Keith Blanchard's lawyer, his legal representative. "Well, I'll pay you," Gretchen said. "What, Mrs. Goddett?" asked Kenneth. "Mr. Goddett's lawyer has frozen your accounts." David Longlin-Eyes looked at the caller ID on his landline. Thanks to his latest girlfriend, a dancer and available girl from Club Fantastic, he learned the number of the DeGard, Bender, and Kimball police stations. "Hello?" he asked, hoping it was just Trish calling for help. "David, listen, it's Gretchen," Gretchen pleaded. "Listen, please, I need help." She screamed in rage as the phone went off. Joe didn't recognize the number and answered. "Are you kidding? This is a joke, right? This must be a joke," he interrupted Gretchen's plea. "No, Joe, this is not a joke," Gretchen whined shrilly, then switched to a gentle voice. "I mean, I'm in trouble. What about you? You always know what to do." "And I know what to do now," Joe said hoarsely. "Oh, yeah?" Gretchen asked hoarsely, then screamed indignantly when Joe disconnected the call. "Keith hid for a week, but he finally forgot and used his credit card to pay for gas. This alerted DeGard police to his location. 20 minutes later, two police officers in khaki Oakleaf Police Department uniforms showed up at Keith Blanchard's motel room. 19 hours later, he stood before a judge in Oakleaf County. 19 hours and 34 minutes later, he was in the back seat of DeGard's police cruiser. 43 hours after he was detained by Oakleaf police, Keith Blanchard was charged. Bail was set at $100,000, and he was released on bail. And Gretchen Gaudet is facing some pretty serious charges, said Kenneth Prejean as he and Keith Blanchard settled into Kenneth's office. So what? Screw her, Keith snapped. Thought you already did that, Kevin Blanchard chuckled. Do you know what the problem with beautiful women is? Keith said, even as Kenneth's personal assistant brought 2 cups of coffee and a bottle of water. They think that just lying on your back and letting you have the pleasure should be enough. The woman almost objected in defense of women. Instead, she bit her tongue and left the room. And the problem with men is that they don't know what to do with a woman, she whispered, closing the office door. Kenneth Prejean was able to reduce all charges against Keith to misdemeanor vandalism of property. Keith was also required to pay damages for Joe's Harley-Davidson motorcycle. Kenneth was also able to do the same for Gretchen Gaudet. The attractive blonde looked around as they left the courthouse. Then she looked at Kenneth. And what should I do now? She asked. Now, I think we need to get divorced. You still want a divorce, right? Asked Kenneth. Yes, I think so. He cheated on me. I'm not going to put up with this, Gretchen said. But, where is Keith? I think he's laying the foundation. DeGard National Bank provided him with the financing that First Union was unwilling to provide, Kenneth shrugged. Kenneth decided that he would charge Gretchen and Keith an extra hour of service for having to drive Gretchen to Keith's house. And when Keith arrived home, he was extremely unhappy to see Gretchen sitting on his couch. What are you doing here? He growled. Kenneth got the charges reduced, she said, puzzled by his angry outburst. No, you stupid fool, what are you doing here? In my house, he demanded loudly. I live here now, remember? Gretchen said, confused. What happened to? Where are all my clothes? Fuck you, he snorted. You and your stupid bitches are flying out of here. All your crap is in that guy's trailer. Joe doesn't. Wait, David, did you give my things to David? Gretchen asked, her voice rising. Don't raise your voice, Keith said. Get out of here. But I live here, Gretchen protested. What part of no, you don't live, don't you understand? Keith barked. He leaned across the coffee table and grabbed her hand, then pushed her towards the front door. Gretchen grabbed her cell phone and purse and headed out. She wasn't moving fast enough for Keith, so he helped her by pushing her again. Hi, Gretchen, David said when he answered the phone. There are no girls. The bus won't drop them off until 4 o'clock. David, Gretchen began. Damn, why is it always about what you need? David interrupted her. Oh, and St. Richards asks about next year's payment. Oh, and St. Thomas asks if Glenda will study there next year. Damn, Gretchen said. The girls were attending Andrew Jackson Elementary School when she and Joe started dating. Joe was able to transfer the girls to St. Richards. The girls love this school, their teachers, their friends. But if Joe doesn't pay their tuition, they'll have no choice but to transfer Gertrude back to Andrew Jackson and Glenda to start attending Northside High School. Are you still here? Asked David. Yes, Gretchen said, sitting down on Keith's doorstep. Sandals with 4-inch heels were not suitable for walking. It was at least 3 miles to Joe's house and 5, almost 6 miles to David's trailer. She didn't know where her minivan was. She checked Keith's garage when she entered the house earlier that day. So, you have my clothes and things? She asked lifelessly. Yeah, damn, that's a lot of junk, huh? Asked David. 5 suitcases and 3 boxes. Why do you need so much junk? What about my minivan? She asked. The one that Joe paid for. The one that Joe has a title for? David asked cheerfully. Damn, Gretchen said again. Probably no chance of you coming for me, huh? Of course, David chuckled. As soon as the Saints win the Super Bowl. She checked her wallet again. Again, there was only $9 in cash, $11.14 if you count change. She stood up and rang Keith's doorbell. There was no answer. Then she took out the house key and opened the door. He was in the shower. His wallet was on the dresser, so Gretchen helped herself with a few $100 bills. Then she went downstairs and came out again. I should have picked up the key, dumbass, she thought as she dialed Rapid's cabs. Rapid Cabs dispatched a surly driver, and she gave him David's address. Is this the trailer park in Tarragona? He asked. I used to date a girl who lived there. Marjorie, oh damn, what was her name? David wasn't thrilled to see his ex-wife, but Glenda and Gertrude were there, so he was civil with her. He reminded her that being civilized was much more than she had ever done for him. Glenda and Gertrude were delighted to meet their mother. They missed her. They missed the comfort of Mr. Joe's home, Mr. Keith's home. Some kids on the bus hash 114 even mocked them for being dropped off in front of a trailer park. And Dad is too rough when he combs my hair, Ruddy complained. Well, maybe if you had less, David said lightly, playing with the girl's long red hair. Dad, stop it, Ruddy demanded. Gretchen complained about David's dinner of fried chicken and mashed potatoes. Do you know how many carbs are in this? She asked shrilly. Do you know how many of us care? He answered with the same tone. He pointed to the stove. When you want to get off that fat ass and make dinner, please be my guest, he offered. I'm sure your kitchen skills have improved a lot since you last lived here, right? My ass isn't fat. Look in the mirror lately, she hissed. Mom, we like his fried chicken, Glenda interjected. Anyway, it's not good for you, Gretchen complained. And fasting isn't good either, said David. That would really ruin your day, right? David asked Glenda, and she giggled. After dinner, Gretchen sat and waited. David sat and looked at her. Finally, he waved his hand, pointing towards the kitchen table. The girls need to do their homework, he said. Okay, Gretchen said, not understanding. Tables don't clean themselves, Gretchen, he said. Gretchen cleared the table. She did this with a lot of noise, slapping and knocking. But David's dishes and cups were made of durable plastic, so she simply made noise. The girls don't have their own rooms, Glenda asked sharply when the girls sat down at the table. Of course there is, but they are in their rooms. How can I help them? David asked, looking at the arithmetic textbook with Glenda. Okay, I'm tired, Gretchen said. Okay, good night, David said. Which room is mine? Gretchen asked. The living room is right there, David said. After finishing his homework with the girls, David said goodnight to them and went to his room. In the morning, David got the girls up and prepared breakfast for them. My God, Gretchen complained. Her head was pounding, her body was stiff. Then she saw their breakfast. Biscuits, hash browns, bacon, Jesus, David, they'll die of a heart attack before they're 20, Gretchen complained. But they will be happy, David shrugged. After the girls left, after Gretchen combed Ruddy's long red hair and Glenda combed her own long blonde hair, David told Gretchen that she had 3 days to find a place to stay. We're divorced, you left me, told me see you later, loser, and dragged my girls away, David snapped, still clearly angry over the bitter divorce. No court in the world will force me to help you, and I'm not going to start now. What about Glenda and Ruddy? Gretchen squealed. Oh no, they're fine, they're quite happy here, David laughed bitterly. They are under supervision. It's your fat ass you have to worry about. David prepared for another day at the Baggett mattress factory and walked out of the trailer. During his lunch break, David called Joe Goddett. Joe, I don't know how long it will take, but I will pay you back, he promised. Glenda and Ruddy really love St. Richard, and Glenda are going to St. Thomas next year. Okay, Joe said. And that's all, David laughed, feeling relieved. You won't make me beg. I'll bring the check, hell, I'm not doing anything right now, Joe said. I'll do it now. Thank you, and I promise you, I promise that I will pay you back, David said. Whenever you can, Joe said. David repeated this statement to Gretchen when he returned home. She had 3 days left, now 2 days, to find herself a new sofa to sleep on. Then he started preparing another dish, rich in carbohydrates and fat. On the morning of the last day, Gretchen said she was moving in with her sister and her sister's partner. Since Stacy and Gina lived in Algie, Louisiana, outside of St. Richard, and since Aunt Stacy and Gina didn't want to see them, Glenda and Ruddy won't go with her. It's okay, I've already paid for next year's tuition, David shrugged. You have enough money, Gretchen flushed indignantly, and I only received $500 a month in child support. Life is a bitch, right? David grinned. Oh, and since they live here now, you won't get that $500 a month anymore. Republican and Democratic conventions were televised, promises were made, accusations were made. As for Joe Gaudette, neither candidate had the necessary skills to be commander-in-chief. But he also didn't like any of the third-party candidates. By mid-August, he just wanted the election to be over, and he just wanted his divorce to be finalized. Paul Robichaud did a superb job restoring Grandpa Joe's desk. Because Joe knew the areas that were damaged and replaced, he could see the repairs. But the average observer would never be able to tell which part of the tree was 93 years old and which part was brand new. The gun safe was returned to Joe's closet and was now securely bolted to the floor. Paul Robichaud assured Joe that an excavator would be needed to remove the safe from the house. But every time Joe walked past the flower box in front of the house, he wanted to take a backhoe and lay waste to the cheerful garden. He was content to spit on Gretchen's flowers. His insurance company declared his Harley Fat Boy a total loss and paid its value. Joe replaced it with a low-profile Fat Boy. He actually liked the new bike better than the old one, but Joe would never admit that to Gretchen. By late August, DeGard National Bank understood why First Union, or rather Joe Gaudette, had refused to approve Keith's apartment complex. District President St. Elizabeth Chad Mintz has appointed Scott Collins as the city's chief engineer inspector. Scott Collins took his job very seriously. The nearly 6-acre foundation had to be dismantled and reshaped and poured to meet both parish and state requirements. Instead of simply pouring a slab that would meet the specifications, Keith or Kevin decided to cut 2 inches off the foundation depth. Scott Collins actually used a standard school plastic ruler, noticed the discrepancy, and had them tear down the second foundation. The water supply also proved insufficient, and the city inspector refused to approve the water supply until the pipes were replaced. Since the new pipes were several $1,000s over budget, Keith or Kevin decided to save money on the wiring. Once again, an attentive city inspector noticed the substitution, and several $100s of wiring ended up in a landfill. By the time the first drywall panel was hung, 2 months behind schedule, Blanchard Construction was facing a loss of nearly $100,000, even if each unit built had sold at full market price. DeGard National Bank risked losing almost the same amount. Then banks began to fail all over the country. Corporations began to go bankrupt. Mortgage holders were trying to demand money to stay solvent, trying to stay afloat. DeGard National Bank, finding itself in dire financial straits, suspended construction of the Stone Crest condominiums. Amid the turmoil, Joe and Gretchen Gaudette appeared before Judge Harold Monroe in the case of Gaudette v. Gaudette. Kenneth prepared Gretchen well. She was dressed in ill-fitting, poor-quality clothing, cried, sniffled, and often tried to expose her impressive breasts to Judge Monroe while answering Kenneth's questions. "Good morning, Mrs. Ads Gaudette, or have you gone back to using the surnames Longline, Hebert, or Simon?" Jessie asked politely. "I went back to my maiden name, Lumpkin," she replied coldly. Jessie grinned. Kenneth clearly didn't know about Gretchen's previous marriages. He then asked Gretchen questions about her claims that Joe Gaudette was having an affair with Ebony Hinton. "Keith told me," Gretchen replied sharply. Jessie whispered to one of his younger assistants. The young man nodded and quickly left the courtroom. "And who is this Ebony Hinton?" Jessie asked. Keith said she was a dancer in this dirty, oh shit, what's the name of this place? Mickey, in Kimball, Gretchen said. But you've never seen this woman? Jesse asked. No, I don't need to see some bitch, Gretchen spat. And you never saw Joe Gaudette with that woman? Jesse asked. No, Gretchen replied sharply. So you never saw this supposed affair? Jesse insisted. I protest that the question has already been asked and answered, said Kenneth. Mr. Pregian, this is a civil case, not a criminal case, Judge Monroe chided. But since it is your client who is making accusations of adultery, I will allow the interrogation to continue. Mr. Johnson, continue. But I'm done with that question, Your Honor, Jesse smiled. Lunch break, Kenneth suggested. Okay, Harold agreed, hitting the hammer. Do you even know this Ebony Hinton? Jesse asked his client. I don't even know Mickey, Joe refused. When they returned from lunch, 6 African-American women were sitting at Joe's table. All 6 looked bored, irritated, and dissatisfied. Gretchen was called back to the stand, and Jesse asked her questions about destroying Joe's property, emptying his bank account, and maxing out their joint credit cards. No more questions, Your Honor, Jesse said, but we'd like to get Keith Blanchard on the stand. Keith looked at Joe Gaudette with hatred. His glance at Gretchen wasn't much friendlier. Jesse greeted the man, asked about his profession, asked about his relationship to each of the parties in the divorce. He then asked Keith to identify which of the 6 women was Ebony Hinton. You don't know, Gretchen screamed as Keith looked shocked. You bastard, you do not know. She collapsed on the table, finally realizing that she had been deceived by a man who hated her husband, who had done the only thing he could to hurt her husband. Joe, oh Joe, I'm so sorry, she sobbed. Me too, Joe said. So, you want me to sue Keith Blanchard? Jesse Joe whispered. What a typical lawyer, Joe laughed. Come on. When Judge Harold Monroe struck his gavel for the final decision in Gaudette v. Gaudette, both parties divided the entire marital property accumulated over 3 years of marriage in half, minus $12,658 for the furniture Gretchen damaged, the remainder of the debt on her minivan, and Joe's motorcycle insurance deductible. Bought a house for $79,500, Joe said to a pale Kenneth, ignoring Gretchen's sobs. Well, valued yesterday at $54,900, count for yourself. He then turned to the 3 remaining African-American women. So which one of you is Ebony? He asked. It's me, honey, the attractive young woman smiled as she stood up. Damn, no wonder I had an affair with you, right? He smiled. You are stunningly beautiful. In your dreams, honey, the dancer laughed. My girlfriend is twice as cool as you. I know it's true, Joe laughed. Despite Jesse's displeasure, Joe told the lawyer that he would not demand money from Gretchen. He knew that she had returned to work at Young Insurance as an agent and was making very little money. Hell, she can't even afford her own place, Jesse, Joe said. I know you lawyers can get blood out of turnips, but let it go, okay? Okay, but you still want to continue the case against Blanchard, right? Jesse grumbled. Oh, hell yeah, Joe said. That son of a bitch needs to pay for this. Joe, I'm sorry, Gretchen cried as they walked out into the afternoon sun. Yeah, apologizing doesn't really change anything, does it? Joe muttered to himself as he fastened his helmet. On a whim, Joe decided to go to Mickey's. It was a little before 4. There was no point in going to work at such a late hour. Joe recognized Kevin Blanchard's 2002 Mustang in the parking lot. I bet he gave Keith the name Ebony, Joe thought, deciding not to stop. He continued driving along Highway 19 until he crossed Highway 54. There was a po' boy at Jack's Creek that made the best catfish po' boy he'd ever tasted, and he wanted some comfort food. The fish was hot, the tomato was crispy, and the beer was ice cold. A couple of drops of hot sauce, and it was almost like heaven for Joe. 90 days, Joe thought. Damn, it took us longer to find the perfect house. 90 days for the divorce to become final. In 90 days, he will be a thrice-divorced man, a 3-time loser at the age of 39. Joe decided to focus on a hot sandwich, a cold beer, and slightly bland fries. 90 days. It took longer than it took Gretchen to find the perfect piece of land in Baylor Lake for their wedding. It took her almost 90 days to find the perfect pale pink dress. She laughed so happily when she found a pale pink tie that matched her dress exactly. He wore it with a black suit and a perfectly crisp white shirt. Glenda and Gertrude looked beautiful, sweet and beautiful in their pale blue dresses. Both girls stood straight and solemn as their mother spoke the words. "Come back, okay?" the older woman shouted as Joe pushed away almost half of his lunch. 90 days, Joe muttered. "Honey, are you going to wait that long?" the woman teased. Joe looked at her and smiled sadly before fastening his helmet. Returning home, Joe parked the Harley in the garage. He closed the garage door and entered the house through the kitchen door to avoid the flowers. Some of them began to wither, others clearly showed signs of death. The message light on his answering machine flashed and Joe pressed the button. "Joe, oh Joe, I can't believe it, oh God," Gretchen sobbed. Joe hit the pause button and looked. The digital display showed that the message lasted 5 minutes, the maximum time the digital voice recorder provided. He deleted the message. "Joe, I know it's probably too late to say I'm sorry." Gretchen's voice was sobbing and sniffling. Joe saw that this message was also 5 minutes long and deleted it. The third message lasted 21 seconds. It was from Mitzi, his personal assistant, reminding him of a board meeting scheduled for the next morning. "Good girl," Joe smiled softly. "That's why I pay you little money." The third message from Gretchen lasted only 4 minutes and 9 seconds, but Joe also deleted it. "What the hell is wrong with me?" Joe asked himself, sitting down tiredly on the new sofa. Gretchen would absolutely hate the new couch. It was deep blue, made of velour. But Joe liked the way he looked against the sand carpet. His beige and blue rocking chair matched both the sofa and the rug. He took off his shoes and stretched out on the new sofa, turned on the remote control, and the LCD screen lit up. "What the hell is wrong with me, huh?" he asked himself again. Vicky began an affair with Ricky Ricardo, as Joe called her Colombian lover. Not only did she have sex behind his back, but she also stole his money and, worse, his only child and flew away. Angela Huvel was a pretty girl who lived next door. She looked after JJ when he and Vicky went on dates. When Vicky ran away, Angela came to console Joe. She admitted that she always felt sympathy for him. 15 months after Vicky's escape, Angela and Joe got married. "At least she didn't empty the bank account," Joe muttered, unable to see the news on TV. Her old high school sweetheart is back in town. Joe later learned that the reason Dwayne was out of town was because of his 4-year stint in the Arkansas prison system. Dwayne wanted to fight. Joe shrugged and said there was nothing to fight about. "Is she so stupid that she ran away with you?" said Joe. "I'm smart enough to let her go." Angela couldn't let it go and goaded Dwayne into a fight with Joe. Joe really thought about his stupidity, falling in love with a girl who was barely out of high school. Dwayne struck first. Joe dodged and beat the goon until the young man wet himself was. Last Joe heard, Dwayne was serving a 12 to 20-year sentence in Mumphrey, and Angela had 3 children and was living with her parents again. He was sure that he and Gretchen would be together forever. They will grow old together playing with their grandchildren. She was not 31 years old, and as an insurance agent, she seemed to be smart. With a sigh, he turned off the TV and went to bed. The new curtains in his bedroom actually blocked out the sunlight. It was not yet 7 o'clock. The next morning at 5:30, Joe woke up and thought wearily of the day ahead. If it hadn't been for the board meeting this morning, Joe would have called and gotten sick. Instead, he made coffee and then fried some thick slices of bacon. He fried 3 eggs in bacon fat. Joe smiled. He could almost hear Gretchen's voice complaining about fat and cholesterol. While sitting at breakfast, he noticed that the message light was flashing again. "Hi, Mr. Joe, it's Glenda," Joe heard Glenda say. "I just got my first grade in algebra and got 100 points. Dad said you'd want to know." Yes, I want to," Joe smiled sadly. Hey, Mr. Joe, sixth grade is so hard, Ruddy's voice said cheerfully. Will you believe it? On the first day, we were given homework. First day. But I'm fine with my lessons, Dad. Do I need to say anything else? Thanks again, Joe, David's voice added. Please, you'll pay back the debt, remember? Joe said, chewing thick bacon. I hope you're doing well, David continued. If you need anything, let me know, okay? 94 days later, Joe pulled a thick envelope from his mailbox, along with a flyer from Abdul's department store and several other letters. Gretchen was a rare customer at the exclusive department store, so they sent sales notices to her home. The final divorce decree largely confirmed what had already been decided in Judge Harold Monroe's courtroom. Knowing that it will happen soon and holding it in your hands are two different things. Joe felt a new wave of fatigue wash over him. The election was over. Barack Obama would become the 44th president. Congress was scrambling to prop up a weak economy, and the weather was turning cold. Weeds had taken over the flower box, but Joe couldn't bring himself to care. Another letter with bright, colorful letters caught his attention, and Joe shrugged. Carnival Cruise Lines tried to entice him to go on a cruise again. He and Gretchen went on a cruise for their honeymoon, visiting the Virgin Islands. Glenda and Ruddy were very upset that they didn't go. Joe promised them that the next time he and Gretchen went, he would take them with him. A cold wind blew off the Atchafalaya, and Joe shrugged again. Why not? Why the hell not? He said. Does it ever get cold in the Bahamas? While Joe logged onto the Carnival Cruise Line's website and entered his promo code, Gretchen blankly read her divorce decree. She sat at a small table in her small living room and read a document. Her tomato basil soup got cold as she sat there, just holding the papers. David sued her. He was now the guardian, the girls were living with him, and he wanted her to pay child support. $500 a month, when most months she was lucky to earn $1,200. Her rent was $395 for a tiny one-room apartment. She considered moving into a two-bedroom apartment in the same complex, but knew she would never be able to support $700 a month, not on commission sales, not when the economy was tanking. Pushing the cold soup aside, Gretchen stood up. Grabbing her purse, she left the small apartment and went down 2 flights of stairs. While Gretchen inserted the key into the lock of Stacy's old Kia, Keith sat on his couch. He sipped his bourbon and sighed. Several days had passed since he left the house. There was no work. Keith drank gloomily, looking at his latest stack of bills. The economy was tanking. Most of his speculative houses were sitting idle, and DeGard National Bank was demanding that he start making loan payments. Even though they stopped the Stone Crest condominiums project, they still wanted their money. Keith drove by the unfinished Stone Crest condominiums and thought about dousing it with gasoline and setting it on fire. Part of the problem with this idea was that Kevin had already canceled the insurance on the property, and if arson is suspected, he and Kevin would be suspects number 1 and number 2. Someone removed all the copper wiring from the walls. Keith was grateful to Scott Collins for forcing them to use plastic pipes instead of the tin-coated pipes they had originally used. The thieves would take as much as they could, but plastic pipes had very little recycling value. Keith was vaguely aware that the car had stopped in front of his house. His house. He took out large loans against property to finance his other projects. He wondered when Danny would demand payment for this. The lawsuit Joe Gaudette filed against him was also looming. Kenneth Prejean was honest with him. Things were looking bad for Keith Blanchard. I haven't even heard of what libel with intent is at all, he muttered, taking another sip of bourbon. What the hell? He shouted when he heard the key in the lock. Seriously, Keith? I thought you'd changed the locks by now, Gretchen said, her beautiful face stained with tears. Bitch, what the hell, oh no, get your fat ass out of my house, Keith yelled. Gretchen threw some legal papers at him. My divorce is over, Keith, she screamed. Keith reached out to her, intending to force her out of the house. The first bullet hit him in the shoulder, and he staggered back. Oh my God, damn it, he shouted with a high, piercing cry. The pain had not yet begun to penetrate his consciousness. There was a deafening roar, a strange metallic smell, and a strong push that twisted him backwards. The second bullet struck Keith in the chest, nearly knocking him unconscious. "Oh God, no, please," he begged as Gretchen aimed her gun at his face. She fired another bullet at him, then shot herself. Joe Gaudette didn't go on the cruise. Instead, he booked a cruise for one adult and two children and sent David and the girls on a Christmas cruise. The girls eventually suffered a terrible loss. 8 years later, 2016. Tuesday was steak fried day at the Dead End Bar. Joe Gaudette took Thomas Bergeron, human resources manager, and Brian Bro, engineering manager, to a business lunch at the bar. "Summer internship is approaching. I looked at the list you gave me, Thomas," said J.O. and smiled when the Asian waitress placed the plates in front of them. Born to be Wild started playing loudly, and Joe noticed Brian's head lifting from the delicious food. The song was a classic, but they played a cover. The big-breasted blonde was a real beauty on stage, twirling her floor-length blonde hair as she took off her leopard print top. Joe saw Brian's face twist with sadness and decided to postpone the discussion until later, at least while the young lady is on stage. The three men ate in silence. "They also have caramel pie, which is amazing," Joe said, and Brian nodded slightly as the beauty on stage was left in a leather bra and leather panties. The waitress smiled and nodded as the men ordered pie and coffee. "Like I said," Joe began as the blonde ran off the stage, "I looked through the list of names you gave me and—" "All 7 of them have letters of recommendation," Thomas said. "We wouldn't consider them if they weren't there," Brian interrupted. But Joe didn't pay attention. He wondered if Buddy and Kelly Huville knew what Angela was doing now. Buddy and Kelly were good, Catholic parents who were very disappointed that their daughter had married him, a divorcee. They almost disowned Angela because of her divorce from him. Even after 4 children, Angela Decker was still a skinny girl as she twirled and twisted to Alien Ant Farm's Smooth Criminal. She still wore her brown hair in a symmetrical cut that perfectly framed her small face. In the bright light, Joe couldn't see her cute freckles on her cute little nose. He could see her Cupid's bow, her sweet, kissable lips. Joe could see that her legs were still a little plump. Angela always hated her thick legs. But even after having 4 children with Dwayne, her stomach remained flat and her breasts were barely larger than the palm of her hand. The customer dropped the bill into the tip jar, and Angela smiled at the man as she removed her lace top. 7 candidates, 5 positions. Who would you rule out, Brian? Joe said, looking away from his ex-wife. We can't rule out Allison Harding. She's the only woman on the list. Brian mused and smiled as the waitress placed pieces of pie in front of them. Damn, you're not stinging the pie, are you? Thomas praised when each piece was an impressive size. We want you to come back. The Asian woman with a noticeable Texas accent smiled. Angela was left in her lace bra and lace French panties. Thanks to her plump legs, she always had a juicy, round ass. When she turned, Joe nodded. She still had that sweet, whippy ass. And we can't rule out Buford Jones. He's the only African-American on the list, Thomas agreed. And this Philip Montos is Hispanic too, Brian added. Just like that Ramon Garcia, Joe remarked. Angela was left in just her maw and tiny panties as Pods Alive faded away. With a smile, the woman collected her tip and clothes and ran off the stage. So, gentlemen, we cannot exclude this. Harding, Mr. Jones, Mr. Montos, or Mr. Garcia, Joe said, signing the receipt and adding an 18% tip to the waitress. So which of the remaining 3 should we keep? Or we could put 1 in administration and 1 in office, Joe wondered out loud, and send 1 to work with the teams. What engineers often forget is that if it looks good on paper. Brian agreed. While the 3 men discussed their summer internship program, Heather Bro sat on the ottoman in Hurricane 3. She saw her dad there, sitting at table number 4. With his sexy, shaved head and blonde beard, he was hard to miss. But before she could approach his desk, before Heather could hug and kiss her handsome daddy, The manager informed her that she had a client in the Hurricane 3 room. Dwayne Decker was a runner in high school and had a runner's body when she left Joe for him. Now Dwayne was a bloated, balding idiot. His body was adorned with numerous prison tattoos, his once handsome face covered in scars from prison fights. Joe's words still stung Angela. Is she so stupid that she ran away with you? I'm smart enough to let her go. Joe didn't even want to fight for her. 13 years after their divorce, Angela now understood why. Joe shouldn't have had to fight for her. They promised each other to be faithful to each other, to respect each other, to love. But Dwayne whined and swore and reminded Angela that she promised that she would be with him until the end of time. Well, Dwayne was now sitting in Bender and would most likely be heading back to Mumphrey, or perhaps Angola, before the end of time. His power attitude seemed so cool in high school. Now, at the age of 34, this power attitude was juvenile, self-destructive, and a boss at King Sanitation threatened to sue the Deckers over his medical bills. Angela didn't know what to sue them for. They were filming a trailer. The big flat-screen TV that Dwayne just had to have wasn't paid off yet. One car would either start or not depending on how cold it was. While Angela prepared to return to the small stage, Joe rode his Harley past the St. County Trauma Center. Elizabeth. He secured the land on which Stonecrest condominiums would stand and sold it to Paula Lambert for the proposed hospital. The speculative homes that Keith and Kevin Blanchard completed also became Joe's speculative homes as a result of the settlement against Keith's estate. He demolished most of the houses. Their construction was of poor quality, their layouts were poorly designed, poorly executed. And in 2009, when the trial finally ended, the metal in the houses was worth more than the houses themselves. The land was worth more than the wood and drywall and fake granite countertops. He drove past the trailer park he owned. 4 Keith speculation houses once stood there. Joe shook his head sadly. He was about to begin construction of a new grocery store on the property. Residents of the trailer park were about to receive eviction notices. Finally, he arrived at his house. He repainted the garage door a battleship color and the door, awning and faux wood shutters brick red. Before he pulled into the garage, he noticed a colorful collection of flowers in a box by the front door, most of which were blooming beautifully in late spring. As Joe entered the kitchen, he saw the message light on his digital answering machine blinking. "Hi, Mr. Joe," Glenda's cheerful voice said, and Joe smiled. "I just passed my sociology exams. I'm sure I passed with flying colors." "I'm sure you do too, honey," Joe told the car. "You're a smart girl." "Mr. Joe, I don't know, God. I hope I made it through," Ruddy's voice said. "But algebra is so difficult. I don't know if I can become an engineer like you." "Hold on, baby. Just hang on," Joe encouraged the car. "Hey, Joe, I've transferred another amount into your account," David's voice said. "Damn it, David. I told you we were even," Joe said. "Told you when they started college. You paid everything." "Either way, we love you," David said. "Love you too," Joe agreed and tossed the ad from Abdul's department store in the trash. Then he remembered and took the papers out of the trash and threw them into a small recycling container. The digital answering machine beeped and the second message began. "Hey, hi, God, I can't believe you still have the same number. Hi, it's Angela." Joe froze as he heard his ex-wife's voice on the answering machine. End.